Testing, testing, testing. Testing, yeah.
So we're going to get started in just a moment, but I'm going to invite everyone to move up to be closer. I know a number of you have to leave for your next class well before 1. But Elijah Anderson was hoping for a more intimate conversation. I didn't quite warn him that we would be in a very large room. So I think that it would really lend itself to a more of a conversation. If folks were more in the center, and he's actually not, he's going to be literally sitting right here. It's much more of a conversation than a lecture style. So it would be great if folks moved in. That would be wonderful. Thank you. And we'll make sure to end in time for folks to leave for their 1 o'clock class. So while y'all are moving and getting resituated, I'm going to introduce Elijah Anderson. It's really an honor to have him join us today in this conversation. Just 11 days ago, what's the date today? 10 days ago? Very, very recently, Elijah was named a Sterling Professor here at the university. For those of you not familiar with the Sterling Professorship, it is the highest honor bestowed on a tenured faculty here at Yale. It is an honor that's recognized, it's bestowed on a tenured faculty who's identified, recognized as among really the best in his or her field and a leader at the university. So it's a really big deal. And Elijah was just named a Sterling Professor. He's in the Department of Sociology. He is one of the leading urban theorists in the world, full stop. Starting this past year, our incoming master students have they read one of his classic works in mods. So many students in this room are familiar with his work. He joined Yale in 2007 from the University of Pennsylvania. He's the author of numerous books that have become canons in urban theory and cultural studies. I'm not going to name a bunch of them. I'm actually going to end my comments relatively short. I will just say that it is an honor to have Elijah Anderson with us today. He's going to have a conversation around race, ethnicity, equity in the U.S., and also talk a little bit about his experience, issues that we've been talking about here at the school. I'm going to just turn it over to Elijah Anderson. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here before you and to see so many of you interested in this issue, or these issues. It's not just one issue, it's a multitude of issues, really, that we're dealing with today, especially with the issues between and among the spaces of the city, white space, black space, racially mixed space, all that, and I want to talk about that. The dynamics of that space and essentially the politics of it as well, you know. And I like to start. I mean, Dean Cito, I appreciate your comments about this award, and I am deeply honored. And I think, I started off at the symbolic bottom of American society. I mean, I was born on a plantation in the Mississippi Delta during the war. My grandmother was a midwife when I was born, and she went to the cotton field every day. My mother was 20 when I was born, and she too went to the cotton field every day. My grandmother was very religious in the Old Testament, the New Testament, and she named me Elijah. I've got a brother named Joseph, older than me. And my folks were sharecroppers, come from a sharecropping family, South, which, as you know, is next to slavery, you know. And during the war, my folks migrated as part of the Great Migration North to Chicago and then to South Bend, where my dad, with a fourth grade education, worked for Studebakers. He worked in the foundry there, which a lot of black people did, and that's really tough work. And I never realized how tough it was till I got a summer job. I was in college, and I worked there I lasted about a week, you know. I mean, I could tell you stories. It's like being in hell, you know. And the soot, the smoke, the metallic dust, you know, you breathe that in. Of course, I wore a mask, but a lot of the men were men, so they just, you know. But that will kill you, you know. And my daddy, he died of lung cancer at the age of 71 and never smoked a day in his life. But that's part of what it meant to do that. And I had so much more respect for him and his work after I worked in that situation for just a few days in the summertime. And he had to do that every day, if you follow me. I could tell you stories about it, but so I came from the symbolic bottom of American society. And now, as Dean Cito points out with this professorship, I mean, you could arguably say I'm operating at the top of the system, as it were, symbolic top, anyway. The word symbols are very important here. I want to talk about this whole issue of white space and black space and racially mixed space to you. And I want to leave you with three concepts. I want to leave you with the iconic ghetto that is the place where the black people live. I want to leave you with the cosmopolitan canopy, this racially mixed space in cities, this island of racial civility located in a sea of racial segregation. See? And various cities have more or less, in a number of these spaces, these islands of racial civility. Philadelphia, I counted 6 major ones. And relations between and among the diverse people of that setting are pretty good. People are pleasant, they're kind, they're empathic, diverse, you know. It's a beautiful place in so many ways. Made up of cosmopolitan people and ethnocentric people. And because it is a cosmopolitan space, a lot of people who are ethnocentric tend to keep their ethnocentrism in check, you know. And they behave and pose as cosmopolitan people, because otherwise they'd be sanctioned maybe, you know. And as you know, cosmopolitan people value all kinds of people. In fact, they think that, you know, just by knowing somebody who's different from myself, I'm going to benefit somehow. I'm going to enlarge my perspective. I'm going to become more sophisticated. And maybe I'm going to become a better person, you know. And this is something that educated people tend to buy into, you see. And that's important, the canopy space, you see. And of course, you've got people coming from the hinterland, the ethnocentric types who oftentimes come from parochial spaces or even ethnocentric spaces, and oftentimes they are ethnocentric to some extent because they don't know any better, you know. They've not been exposed. I mean, that's our theory about it, you see. And if they could just be exposed, they could do better with respect to dealing with different kinds of people. If they were educated, if they were somewhat more privileged, they could do better, whatever. At any rate, the people who are more ethnocentric mix with the cosmopolitan people. Sometimes that's in the same person. They code switch from cosmo to ethno, depending on the weather, or the social circumstances, if you will. And all this has been developed through ethnography. I mean, I spent many years looking at these spaces, trying to figure it out, kind of thing. So, and of course, the iconic ghetto is this place in the minds of people where the black people live, Now, black people may not live there, but because of the salience of this place in people's minds, when a black person, say of my complexion, is not known, and people just assume that you're from the ghetto. You may be middle class. You may be African. You may be Haitian. But because you're in that space, it's easy for people to assume that you're from the local hood, you see. And the local hood, being from the local hood, gives you a deficit of credibility. This is very powerful. A deficit of credibility compared to white people. In everything. Everything. And the iconic ghetto hovers over American race relations. It hovers. Even President Obama had to deal with this. How do you deal with it as a black person? How do you do it? Well, you do like Obama did, The brothers at the barbershop say, Obama's a good dancer. You dance. You dance. You perform respectability. You work to disabuse people of the idea that their racial stereotypes apply to you. And you do this through this politics of respectability. You dress well, you speak well, you observe all the shibboleths of the dominant society. You buy into those and you present those and you code switch maybe like Obama could do. He can sound like Al Green sometimes. Well, a little bit, But that's what I mean, code switching, you see. The iconic ghetto. And of course, the white space. The white space. The white space, the black space, the cosmos space, these are perceptual categories. Perceptual categories. And for black people who have been dealing with this for a long time, they have their eyes open for white space because white space can be very difficult to manage, very difficult to navigate, you see. So these spaces are really important here. Now the iconic ghetto is rooted in slavery. It's rooted in slavery, you see. In 1857, Justice Taney said, black people have no rights that white people are bound to respect. No rights. And he was a Supreme Court chief, and he was dealing with the Dred Scott decision, And they were trying to think of how far to extend slavery, what have you, but that's beside the point here. The point is he was commenting about the situation of black people and white people in America at that time, you see. That black people have no rights that white people are bound to respect. And of course we had the Civil War, emancipation, and black people left the plantations. They left the South for cities of the North and the South, villages or whatever. They left, And for a minute, there were It was amazing. I mean, you had black people doing all kinds of things too. I mean, at least the upper classes among blacks, if you could call them that, the biracial types who were the sons of slave masters and slaves and who were somewhat privileged. I mean, we had congressmen, we had senators, 1868, 1870, And of course, then we had the election of Rutherford B. Hayes, which you should Google, Rutherford B. Hayes in the election of 1876. The Compromise of 1876, when he basically bargained to get the presidency by effectively abdicating the North's responsibility to the areas of the South that the soldiers were administering and that kind of thing. That was the deal. That was the compromise, the big compromise of 1876. And of course, he took the troops away from the South and let the South deal with it, deal with its own situation. And what we had then were people trying to reestablish slavery, to throw black people back in their place, so to speak, because they've gotten too uppity, so to speak, And that's important. But the big thing I want to say is that as black people left the South and migrated to cities north and south, their stigma both followed them and preceded them. So when they landed in certain places, as they navigated certain spaces, as they moved north, there were sundown towns. You had to be out by sundown if you were black. If you weren't out, we'd arrest you and put you on a chain gang. Contract labor. And that system persisted to the 1970s. There's a book called Slavery by Another Name. Google it or go to Amazon. But it speaks about how even relatively recently, black people who caught up in that system were arrested and put on chain gangs and sent to the county farm, you see. And they would work on contract with various corporations, and then if you messed up, they extended your time. Corporations like U.S. Steel and various others, are documented in this book. Slavery by Another Name. But the big point is that these black people migrated away from the South for a better life. And you can imagine individuals coming to certain towns were tolerated, maybe, big cities tolerated, that kind of thing. They lived in certain villages, certain parts of town. And then as the numbers grew, people coming to town, they were cordoned off. They were encouraged to live among their own people for reasons that they themselves liked, to be around people like themselves, but also there was a sense in which it was not simply voluntary, if you will. In fact, when they went to some of these places, they encountered Europeans, immigrants. And the immigrants may not have been racist before they met black people, but they soon discovered that their own interests lay in distinguishing themselves from black people, if you will. So these people in the white majority worked together to contain black people in certain areas of the town. And of course, these communities grew and grew. And what's interesting here is that this is the root of the iconic ghetto, the place where the black people live, the black side of town, see. And if you look at if you study various cities in this country, you can see how the white populations work to disenfranchise these communities and treat them as second-class, the people as second-class citizens, following what Tawney talked about in 1857. Oftentimes the city services were not provided to these places. They became slums. They became, the black side of town, and they were a terrible place to live sometimes, if you know what I mean. But the big point here is that the iconic ghetto reinforced what slavery established. That is the black body's place at the bottom of the order. This is very important here. Because if it established that place at the bottom of the order, that positionality became institutionalized and was passed on from racist generation to racist generation to racist generation to racist generation. What that means is that the white populations basically became socially invested in this positionality, the place of black people. Socially invested. Their identities had become institutionalized. So even if they weren't mad at black people, even didn't hate black people, they knew that the black person was lower than they were, better than the black people. See? You still with me? So that's very important to appreciate here. It's very important to appreciate. Because in this whole context, you've got these spaces developing, the white space, the black space, and even to some extent the mixed space, although it wasn't like as big as it is now. I mean, today it's big. I mean, those days it wasn't very big. White space, black space, that was what you had. And I could develop this with all the immigration that we've had from colored countries, which were to some extent, helped by the civil rights movement and the ideologies that developed out of the civil rights movement. We've had a liberalization of immigration rules and laws, so we get people now from various colored countries. And back in history, you only took people from northwestern Europe, pretty much. So these things have changed, and that's given rise to the canopy. So mixed, all different kinds of people there. You see, it's important to realize that given this configuration of white space and black space and racially mixed space, that white people typically avoid black space. But black people have to navigate white space as a condition of their existence, you see. And that's the perceptual category, Well, we had the civil rights movement, as many of you appreciate. That was big. That was really big. Because at the beginning of the civil rights movement, it was a terribly, terribly, terribly segregated society. I mean, starkly segregated, You think it's segregated today? It was starkly segregated back in that day. And as you know, the civil rights movement culminated in riots all over this country. I mean, city after city after city burned. Black people were complaining about their status. And the civil rights movement was relatively peaceful for a long time, but it culminated in these riots, but also increasing militancy among black people, especially the youth. I mean, the Black Panthers, that's an interesting thing to think about. Even people of my generation, I mean, people talk, let's get us some guns, let's do this, let's do that, This was in the air. My war's not Vietnam, it's here. So the country had a problem. It had to deal with this, you see. And the Cold War was going on. I remember Khrushchev and Kennedy having this big debate about who's got the best system. And Khrushchev just said, well, in your country, black people can't even vote. How can you be a democracy? And Kennedy had to fall back. So, well, yeah. But the rub is that big money was at stake, because a lot of the developing countries were becoming newly independent and trying to decide which way to go, whether to follow the Soviet Union or to follow the West. Big money was at stake. And for the U.S. way to be attractive, they had to make America more like America, you see. So that put in place, and this is very important for you to understand, that put in place what I call the racial incorporation process. The racial incorporation process. Affirmative action, set-asides, all kinds of strategies and schemes to increase the size of the black middle class. You see? That's what happened when I was just about to graduate from college. In 1969, I went to Bloomington, IU in Bloomington, you know. And the system put a positive premium on black skin, you know. I mean, people would grab you off of elevators. If you had a suit on and you looked intelligent, hey, you want a job? You want a job? You want a job? You know? So affirmative action was basically this effort what we had was a proliferation of tokens. You know, I don't mean that in the pejorative sense. I mean it in the sense that a token is a symbolic representative of a group that is excluded or not present, you see. And typically that token is not consequential, you see. You see? And so a lot of universities, a lot of stores, a lot of businesses, a lot of schools, they wanted to show that we were not prejudiced, we're not discriminatory. And so they would window dress with these black people. And oftentimes that's all it was tokenism, you see. But many black people who benefited from that, and I'm one of the ones who did, you know, I know the story. I can cite it chapter and verse. I'm one of the ones who stayed, who stuck. But a lot of black people fell by the wayside because they were just used for social peace. You see? And today in America, we've got the biggest black middle class in American history. The biggest black middle class in American history, all because of this incorporation process that I'm talking about, you see. And black people today, because of the victories of the civil rights movement, fair housing and public accommodations laws and all that kind of, I mean, it was a movement to make black people full citizens of America. To have the same rights, obligations, and duties as white people. That's what it was about. And a lot of black people have achieved that today. There's been a lot of progress. You see. I mean, black president. I teach at Yale. And there are many others who are operating at the very top of the society and doing well. Competent people, you know. At the same time, we have the iconic ghetto, okay? The iconic ghetto, the place where the black people live. See? Now the black ghetto has been decimated by recent economic changes. Decimated. You see, we're moving through a period now where we privilege high technology and service in a way as opposed to manufacturing, you see. The jobs that used to exist in a place like New Haven and Philadelphia and Bridgeport and these places, you know, have basically been sent to non-metropolitan America. or they become mechanized, they become computerized and cybernized and all that, or they've gone to Mexico, or they've gone to China, or they've gone to India. They've gone to various developing countries, so that structurally our poor people living here in this country are effectively competing with poor people across the globe. And in that context, the standard of living has to come down in order for the companies to come back. The result is a kind of structural poverty. Structural poverty. You see? This is not to be blamed on people. Structural poverty. The jobs are not. The jobs have disappeared that would allow you to make a decent living. The service jobs that are left won't allow you to make a decent living. Maybe 2 or 3. You see? And this change, this big change I'm talking about, let that sink in. This affects people with limited human capital. It's not a black or white thing. It affects people with limited human capital. People without the skills and the education. That's why many of you are here, getting human capital, something to trade in the workplace. And a lot of these people living in these places, they don't have the kind of human capital they need in order to trade it for decent living. And this is not just a black issue. You got the white working class. You've got Latinos. You've got great numbers of people you got great numbers of people in our country who are not making an effective adjustment to this dislocation, you see, that's happened. You see? That's important to appreciate. See? Structural poverty. And when the system is not working for people in these structurally poor communities, what do? When the system abdicates its responsibility to these neighborhoods, these places, what do? Code of the street. Read my book, Code of the Street. It's all in there. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. You can't count on the police, you can't count on the state. You take matters of self-defense into your own hands, you see. Increasing homicide rates in these inner city poor communities, that's part of the result. It's not a black thing, it's just a human thing, you see. It's important to appreciate that. And you know what else? It affects a lot of white people. A lot of white people. Erstwhile supporters to some extent of American civility with respect to all kinds of people, And today, many of these people are going for themselves, you see. And in the incorporation process, when they brought black people into the system, a lot of white people were very comfortable with that. It wouldn't have happened without support from white people. But there were a lot of white people who felt that their own rights were somehow abrogated by the inclusion of black people, you see. In fact, these black people became the personification of certain white people's sense of inequality, you see. And that was a small group at the time it was happening. They complained, but they were oftentimes ignored, and they were, because we had to have social peace and whatever, you see. But over time, as we've had deindustrialization and the rise of the global economy, that number of disenfranchised white people has grown. And they've become more vocal. And they helped to elect Donald Trump. You see? Because he promised to fix it. That's where we are. One last thing I'll mention before I stop is, there's now a campaign to eliminate black people from white space. It manifests itself in white people calling the police on black people. There are other things too. So you operate while black, you can have the police call on you. Or you can experience, I don't want to offend anybody, I should give a trigger warning here, trigger warning. You can experience what black people call the nigger moment. The nigger moment. The nigger moment is a moment of acute disrespect based on your blackness. And the canopy is a beautiful place, but it has fault lines, you see. And these moments of acute disrespect can come out of the blue. Now, the nice way to talk about it is microaggression, But black people call this the nigger moment. I don't like the term micro because these are hardly small. The small ones are like slights that you deal with as a black person while you navigate white space. Insults, slights, but you ignore those, Otherwise you go crazy. And these are things that black people know. But the big ones can get you killed. The big ones can make you change your job. The big ones can make you abandon your white friends. The big ones can be traumatic, you see. And this is not peculiar to black people, you see. Other groups who are marginalized experience these in moments too. They don't call them in moments. They say, well, I had my Jew moment. I had my Asian moment. I had my Latino moment. I had my gay moment. But it's a moment of acute disrespect based on one's particularity, you see. And when you go through it, it is no fun. In part because you expected to be treated well in this space. And suddenly you see a profound contradiction between what you expected and how you're treated, you see. And you experience this basically alone. Nobody understands it except you sometimes. You go to your black friends and say, oh, I had my nigger moment. Say, oh, what? I mean, didn't you know about white people? You fool enough to have a nigger moment. This is what? You go to white friends and they say, well, she was a jerk. That doesn't satisfy you because you know she was racist. You see? What we're dealing with today, here's another term for you to think about. What we're dealing with is a new kind of symbolic racism. A new kind of symbolic racism that is a function to some extent of the iconic ghetto. And this incorporation process that has put so many black people out of their place compared to where they belong, given the symbol of their skin, you see. So there's a sense in which, by me standing before you, I am out of my place. Out of my place. I invite the nigger moment just by being in this status, if you follow me. This moment of acute disrespect based on my blackness. No, it's not coming fast and furiously. It comes out of the blue when you least expect it. The nigger moment, you see. And if you could interview a lot of black people, Latino people, Asian people, Jewish people, women, they could talk about their nigger moment. They don't call it nigger moment. They say, I had my Jew moment, my woman moment, my whatever. But the difference between these moments and the black moment, now listen to this carefully. The difference between these other moments and the black moment is the fact that the iconic ghetto is right across the street. And so when a black person walks around Yale's campus, who might be a professor, who might be an administrator, that person is oftentimes confused with people of the hood. Not that that's a bad thing. I mean, I love the hood. When I go to the lunchroom over here, I eat at Sullivan sometimes. I sit with the help. We have wonderful conversations. I feel comfortable talking to them. I talk to my white colleagues too. But I feel comfortable talking with the help. But it's easy to be confused with people of the hood. When you're confused with people of the hood, you operate with a deficit of credibility. You go through life with a deficit of credibility compared to your white colleagues. Deficit of credibility. And even to deal with that, as I said about Obama and the rest of these black folk who are able to navigate these white spaces, you dance. The politics of respectability. But you know what? That deficit of credibility gives way to a provisional status. Provisional status. We'll never get home free. This is perennial as grass. The provisional status. And that's what we deal with. I'll stop there. We can have a conversation about this. Hope it didn't spoil your lunch. I wanted to just be clear about what I'm talking about here. A lot of this is in my book, The Canopy, but I've just almost finished another book called Black and White Space, which the University of Chicago Press is going to publish, and we're going to give it up in January. But it takes this argument even further. So this is a sequel to The Canopy. So let's open up for comments and questions. I'm happy to discuss it with you. Thank you. Anybody?
I will say we have microphones, and I'm not going to field questions or answer field questions, but please do use the microphone.
Hi, my name is Monica. I'm currently working as staff, and I'm also a recent grad at the school. I'm Peruvian, and I also had to navigate the U.S. with the label of Latina, which was a really novel thing for me. And my question is, what would you advise to people who are like not aware that they create these moments on like what techniques or what strategies we can all use to check ourselves so that we're not creating these moments for people who we've already labeled as a certain identity?
Yeah. I have to believe that education is very important. I think that everybody should read my book, you know. But seriously, I just feel that it's important to educate people, and the fact is, I really believe this. There are a lot of people of the majority who are sympathetic. They just need to know, need to understand, if you know what I mean. And a major problem for black people and for others too, I think, as they navigate these white spaces. Is to figure out who is who, which is very difficult because there are a lot of white people who mean you well, and there are a lot of white people who mean you ill. The problem is telling which is which, and that's difficult, and sometimes you don't learn it until it's too late, if you follow me. Sorry to say that, but that's what goes on. So one of the challenges is to find allies and spread the word, you see. But to find allies, and that's a tall order. Are you with me or against me? You with me? Do that. But you never, because a lot of this is about situations. A lot of this gets political. You know, a lot of this is negotiated, you see. And that makes it very difficult, you see. But I think general education can be a help. Just the vocabulary that I'm trying to put before you might be helpful. Might be. I don't mean to get political, but I think we need a new president too. So. Other comments? Yes, sir.
So one thing that I think a lot of people have noticed sort of with the president and a lot of what's happening is that there's a reluctance to use the word racism or racist when applying it to things that people say or actions that they take. And actually we got an email from the president of the university today calling flyers racially provocative. And it seems like people take great pains to steer around that. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that phenomenon.
Yeah, well, it's a dirty word. It's a dirty word, racism, I think. And I think since Martin Luther King was killed, I think it's become a really, it's become a sin to be racist. I mean, to be declared a racist. And it's hard to maybe appreciate what I'm saying, but there was a major, major rupture when King was assassinated in this country, and we've gotten far away from that moment in 1968. But I think it was, and it's kind of wearing off, but it's still a horrible thing to be accused of. And yet we have a lot of racist people who don't wish to be called out, if you will. And we just don't want to talk about that. We just don't want to talk about racism, you know? And we need to. What I'm offering here in this analysis is this new kind of symbolic racism that's a function of this positionality between the iconic ghetto and the white space and cosmos space, so to speak, you see. And the implication is that it's not just white racism that we have to deal with, you see. It's a racism that anybody can get in on vis-a-vis the iconic ghetto, including black people themselves. In other words, in this new framework I'm developing, which posits the iconic ghetto as this space that establishes the black body at the bottom of the order, virtually anybody who's not of the ghetto can be racist towards the ghetto, if you will. Symbolically racist, if you will, you see. And that's different because when I was in college, we would identify the white racists. We would talk about white racism, white racism, white racism. And this is not to say that the old white racism that's associated with white supremacy is gone. No, the new iconic ghetto is a function of that old white supremacy, you know. But the new form is a function of what's happening right today, and this has to do with social place. The idea of black place at the bottom of the order, you see. And so black people are in these white spaces operating as, normal people, quote unquote. A lot of people who feel that their own rights are being abrogated by the rise of black people sometimes become offended, if you will. This is one reason why people call the police these days. They also have a sense that they're supported by, people like Trump and others. There's a movement going on. So this is like, put these black people back in their place, you see, that kind of thing. So it's complicated. It's complicated to be sure. But I think that discussion needs to be had. I think we need to talk about race and not shy away from it. Yes.
Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Bruni. I'm a forestry student. Thank you so much for your talk. I just have a question about white space in terms of academia and workplaces. And oftentimes you have like 5 black students in a class, or in a class of 160 students, or you have 1 black student or 1 Latinx student in a company, right? So oftentimes that's white space, right? So how does that relate in terms of like tokenization and upholding, do you believe that that's upholding racist structures? If they're like, oh, look, we have, we're not racist, we have 5 black students, or we're not racist, we have 1 Latinx, coworker here. I mean, how do you see that as embedding these, sort of institutionalizing the ideology of, subversively, right, of racism? I'm just curious about that connection.
Yeah, well, when I was in college, my last semester, I had this Jewish professor who was a radical, and I was getting an A in his political science class. And he said, "What are you going to do next? You're bright, you're black." I said, "I'm going off to the University of Chicago." And he said, "Oh my." He said, "Watch out. Watch out. They're going to use you. They're going to use you." And I didn't understand what he was saying. I just was glad to be going off to Chicago, But over the years, you realize that in so many of these white spaces, you are indeed a token, not in the most pejorative sense, but in the sense that you are a symbolic representative of the group that's not here, And at the same time, in that space, there are a lot of people who wish to tokenize you, you see, to see you as a token, to treat you as a token, to treat you as ineffective, as symbolic, you see. And the way to combat that is to be consequential. To be consequential. See, there's kind of a contradiction between token and consequence. And I think one of the ways you avoid that, and a lot of black people who make up this new black middle class are incredibly consequential. That's part of the task, that's part of the challenge, to be consequential in the face of all this adversity that's ready to tokenize you, you see. And people do it without even thinking, They're not necessarily malicious when they do it, you see. But they do become provoked when they see you out of place sometimes. It's like dissonance. It's like cognitive dissonance sometimes, if you know what I mean. Like, who's that? Like, what's he doing here? You see. Which may not be a statement out of malice, but it's to do with this dissonance that you feel, which is itself graceless, maybe, if you follow me. You see. But I think that as a defense, a lot of black people, Puerto Rican people, even Asian people, whoever, oftentimes gravitate to one another for support. It's natural. It's natural. And at some point, we used to say, we get beyond that, and we get this cosmo ideal where you see various groups of people, all different colors, all different types, coming together as people. That happens under the canopy, especially under the canopy. So.
Well, his book, one of his books, is required reading for all of our incoming students, and maybe his new book may also be required reading. I have a feeling that this is just the beginning of a long conversation we're going to have at FES. I want to thank Elijah Anderson for coming today and sharing his thoughts with us. Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Great, wonderful, wonderful. I'm glad it made sense to. I was hoping that.
I really, really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you.
And I look forward to sometime getting to know you a little bit. My calendar has been so terrible, and I'm leaving tomorrow at 3 a.m., or I would go to dinner with you tonight.
Oh, okay.
We'll find another time.
Okay.
We have a lot of faculty who all said they wanted to go to that dinner, so I had to limit it to just 4 other faculty.
Okay.
But I think we should set up
Started with the dean, and I
Okay. Oh, well,
we haven't had this from dispatch.
really.
Other people.
Hope it resonated for people. It's from the heart, just.
And he's not going to talk to our doctoral students.
So can we give this to somebody? Or?
Okay.
I asked Matt to send me the background.
Oh, I haven't. I just have to get it to wake up. I pulled them off the other one and emailed it to myself. So I'm ahead of you. Ah. Now that everybody knows what my password is.
I definitely think so. I think you moderated very honestly. Yeah, for sure.